Okay, I went into a butcher's shop and I asked, could you please just spare us a small piece of Devon sausage, which was a very cheap Aussie sausage. And the lady behind the counter said, we're not here for you bloody hippies to bludge off. Tears formed in my eyes. I felt sadness for the squares that had denied me food. And I returned to where Leslie lay, and then we lay there until night time, and then we trudged the remaining 3 kilometres through the sprawling town to Albury's south side. And we came to a service station. We were faint with hunger, but the next driver shared biscuits with us, and next morning we arrived on the outskirts of Melbourne. And Les phoned her contact in South Yarra. I was delighted to learn that it was Divine Marcia, who I'd first met at Chevrill's Hotel. Like me, Marcia often drifted interstate. She was living in an old Kew mansion and calling herself Marcia von Schonkingham. And it was to be our base. Hang on, I've got to put this page down a bit. It was to be our base, right, yeah. Anyway, Marcia told us on the phone to get a taxi and she'd pay when we got there. So we hailed a taxi and hopped in, and I cradled the duffel bag. After passing a few suburbs, I smelt the unmistakable odour of marijuana. And the cab driver was making sniffing noises with his nose. And I thought, oh shit, he can smell the grass. And cars in the daytime traffic had their lights flashing. Now, you know, I didn't know a thing about cars, so I thought the flashing lights on the cars, it was 1967, and I hadn't even learnt about turning indicators. So I'd been watching the turning indicators on the cars and thinking that, Melbourne cops signal about drugs by flashing their lights in the daytime. Our driver might be an undercover cop. Well, now I'm old and smart, I realise the lights were turning indicators. They were setting a trap for us. And I had to warn Leslie without the driver hearing. So I said, we'd better stop and get some meat. Mindless was drumming her fingers, completely unaware of my flip out, in time with the Rolling Stones' 19th Nervous Breakdown on the cab radio. She glanced across and smiled, and more urgently I said, we must stop the cab here so we can get out, get some topside steak from the butcher. And she said, what do you want about? Why do we need meat? Alliterating carefully, I warned, if we don't cop some meat, we won't be able to go to Uncle Jack's tonight. We've got to get out and go shopping for lamb chops. We argued back and forth until she flipped her wig. She said, you're paranoid, baby, so please shut up about meat and lamb chops and steaks and uncles that we don't have and whatever else you're on about. So I shut up. Boy, I thought, she'll be so sorry she'll be so sorry that she didn't get out and go to the butcher's when all these cop cars surround us in a minute. Then she'll realise how perceptive I am in jail. Oh shit, Melbourne's Pentridge jail will be a tough place. What turned out to be a run-of-the-mill methadone paranoia lasted until Marcia's place. When I saw the cab drive off, my fear went with it. Marcia welcomed us, unloaded the envelopes of grass, hid them in a cupboard, filled a hookah pipe to have a test sample, and played Manfred Mann's new LP, Man Made. That night many people came. They looked like hippies or gypsies or musicians or pirates or holy monks. They came into the hookah room and they sampled greatly. Musicians played, gypsies got stoned, hippies changed chairs, pirates spoke wisely, and monks told jokes. One by one, they disappeared into the night with a free envelope or 3. We now had 120 envelopes left instead of 160, but we had collected $0. The great Melbourne grass drought was over. Around 1 a.m, I got into Marcia's bathtub. I was obsessive about keeping clean. I couldn't do hippie love God stuff if I smelt like B.O. plenty. The travelling speed had blended with the pot smoked. And whenever I used to smoke pot, my great lover persona used to pop up. And mixed with my latent paranoia, I was wallowing in the water, singing, splish, splash, I was taking a bath, long about a Saturday night, woo, rub-a-dub, just relaxing in the tub. I joyously imagined, wrongly, that I'd be honoured by Marcia and Leslie in a ceremony of Kerouac Holy Kama Sutra Yab Yum in Marcia's love bed. I washed carefully, making sure my skin was neutral in case Marcia was very uninhibited. I glanced up at the plaster on the roof. There was a ceiling. Hang on, I lost my place. Up on the roof I saw a large crawling insect. Now it was probably a giant cockroach because there were quite a few in Marcia's place, but I didn't know that yet, and I was watching it and I telepathed up to it. Hi there, hi bug. Have you come to lead me to the Yab Yum session? As my brainwave hit the bug, it unfolded its wings and slowly crawled across the ceiling. Fear entered me. Now I'm old, I realise that this innocent insect represented the nasty Spanish fly drug that I'd read about once in a Lawrence Durrell novel. And anyway, I got out of the bathroom and forgot about the bug. And when we went to bed that night, Marcia wasn't in the bed. It was just me and Leslie. So, well, that was cool. So Marcia told us that Melbourne had 2 great hippie pubs. The best is Macy's at South Yarra, and the other one is the Continental in the city. The British Lion at Carlton is okay, but everybody there is usually broke and they fight a lot. So 2 days went by and Melbourne folk came to turn on and then left with an ounce or 2. About 60% paid for it, and the rest gave us excellent reasons why they could be trusted to pay us later. Potheads were an extended family. When Bob Dylan sang about the ship coming in, we thought he was talking about a hippie ship carrying lots of grass. On the 3rd day, Marcia took us to Carlton. That's where lived Abraham Dave. He was Jewish. Big Lily, I think she was Jewish, and Billy Lockery, who was a ratbag. Chris Hield, Lenny Carroll, Johnny Bates and Les Robinson suddenly arrived from Sydney. They were worried that we'd given away all those ounces but collected hardly any money. How much you got left, they said. Leslie said, we've been doing PR. Everybody will buy now they know how good it is. And Lenny Carroll smiled and he said, we bought up another lot, but this time we got to sell it. No samples. So 2 days later, we had collected only $160, but there were 30 ounces left. Chris Hield, he was keen. He said, we sell the rest at the Continental and the City and Her Majesty's at South Yarra and the British Lion. So we moved to a house in Fitzroy containing 2 musicians, 2 girls who worked for Go Set magazine, the pop magazine, and a real old guy called Cliff Richard, not the singer, who was really old, about 60, the oldest hippie that we knew back then. A few more Sydney people had arrived after hearing rumours of free grass. Wherever we went, I was accepted, and it wasn't just the grass. After so many lonesome years seeking beatnik world, I felt I belonged. I told everybody that I was worried that a cop might search me, so the girls suggested jokingly that I should disguise myself as a little old lady. Chris will take the money from people at the pub and tell them to pick up the gear from his auntie on the corner. That'll be you, Kaz. You give it to them and the cops will think you're just a dear old lady and we won't get busted. So a couple of people thought that was pretty insane, but the girls made me up to look like a granny, and we headed to the first pub with the gear down my bra. Byers would give bread to Heald, and he signalled me how much, and I dug in my bra for the dope, but it only happened once. After the first customer, I got a bit paranoid that I didn't really look like an old lady and ran home and got out of the gear real quick. Yeah. And then Johnny Bates came up to us and he said he'd met a Labor politician who had invited him to stay at the Labor politician's house. And Johnny said, he's got a house at Brighton Beach, a real posh house. I told him I was a homo and he gave me the key. So let's go have a look. I think he's rich. So we got on a train looking for the house. It took 2 hours walking the streets to find a place because nobody had mobile phones in those days. You had to really follow a map book to get anywhere. So Bates said he's coming back from Canberra in 3 days, and he gave me the key and he told me to make myself at home. So we found the house and quietly, so as not to alert the neighbours, we entered the luxurious house, sampled the cocktail cabinet, watched the posh 21-inch TV, played a couple of his LP records, but they were mostly Sinatra, and we started eating his food. And Bates said, he might get mad if we use the bedrooms. We better not mess up the joint. What if he comes back and wants to fuck me? I'm no puff. And Bates looked like a gypsy with broken nose and real rough features, and he was about 30 with a great sense of humour. And we were his only family. But Chris Heald told him, don't worry, by the time he comes, we'll be gone. We joked, yeah, mate, we'll protect you. Yeah, we'll make you a chastity belt and block your bum with cement just in case. And Johnny said, I'll sue him for child support if I get pregnant. So that night we sold grass at the University Hotel, then we turned home and smoked. The politician had an exotic Egyptian bubble pipe with 4 extensions, and we used it to the max. Now, I'd never smoked grass much, but that night I indulged. About 1 a.m, the carpet turned into a magic carpet, and it took me up through the ceiling and through the roof to float above the housetops. I thought, uh-oh, this must be what dying is like. And I descended back to the lounge room. Someone was talking about self-improvement. My mind self-examined and worked out that there were 2 fears I had. One was the fear of violence. And then the room seemed to turn into a Tibetan temple where I was to face the test of courage. 5 samurai entered. They looked fierce and glowed with maroon radiance, but I sensed empathy, so I said, I'm ready to fight. Back in the real world, 5 pals thought I was out of my brain, and one told me, cool it, Kaz, you don't need to fight. The saying, chill out, hadn't been invented yet. Another one patted me on the back and said, cool it, everything's okay. So I passed my ritual rite of passage. I relaxed into self-satisfaction, but a minute later I entered the twilight zone. There's one more fear I've got. I'm afraid of being forced to suck cock. I must rid myself of that fear too. Only then will I be truly enlightened. In front of me, big Chris Heald held his long erect cock. "Here, try this one for size," he said. And Leslie said, "Yeah, Kaz, wrap your lips around that." I forced myself to put my lips near it, but thankfully Chris's cock turned into the biggest joint of pot I'd ever seen. But I'd overcome my fear and I felt greatly blessed. And then I zoomed into the country beside a tranquil lagoon and recalled that I had one more fear. As a child, I'd been afraid to dive headfirst off of Henley Beach jetty into the sea. Well, here goes. I swan dived into the pool, but when I hit the water, it morphed into the lounge room carpet. Everybody helped me to my feet. The shag pile had grazed the skin of my knee, and I was told, "You've had way too much gear. You better go sleep it off." So I went to bed and slept. But then later, about 3 a.m, I woke up paranoid that the house would be raided by the cops, so I walked through Brighton until I got lost. And there were buses in the yard, about 6 buses, so I climbed through a bus window and slept in the back seat. At 7 a.m, I was woken by a driver who told me to fuck off. Now, I'd forgotten where the house was, so without any money, I tried to find Brighton Beach, but I was too paranoid to ask directions in case people knew that I was living in a house with lots of pot. So I waited on the hot sand of the beach at Brighton, and I telepathed to my pals, hoping that a psychic one would come and find me. They'd gone for a swim yesterday, so I thought today would be the same. But then around 5 p.m, everybody did come to the beach, and thank God I found them. I hung around Leslie to make sure she still liked me, and 2 days passed in comfort until we ran out of food, money and grass. Johnny Bates thought that his politician might call the cops when he found us in his mansion, so we prepared to leave. We'd smoked a lot of pot and taken a couple of methadone, but we were now sober and very seedy. And Chris Heald took charge as usual, and he said, "We'll sell some of these antiques to get back to Sydney. Don't attract attention, so only grab as much classy gear as you can. Carry under one arm." I didn't want to steal from a left-wing politician, so I took nothing. Besides, I was afraid of the cops. But the others grabbed a chess set, a mahjong set, an oil painting, a cutlery set, a cuckoo clock, a pearl necklace, and a samurai sword. And they headed for the Melbourne CBD to sell the swag at different hock shops, and they got a fraction of what it was worth. I had taken nothing. Hild stole the most and made enough to go by train, and the rest of us split into pairs and hitched back to Sydney.